Hello everyone, it's the North Woods Fairy, and today I'm going to be reading supposedly some of the scariest stories on Reddit. I found them by Googling scariest stories on Reddit. I have the app, but I can never seem to figure out how to find things. And also I didn't want to have to read through a bunch of other stories, because that takes time, and these are supposed to be, according to some people, the scariest ones. So I hope you like my new red backlight, which I might be able to show you a bit of. Just by going like this. Oh, you can't even tell it's red. But now you can. It's supposed to be a bit spooky, right? Okay, so let's get right into it, okay? I'm going to try to do a soft spoken voice. I'm still working on my audio. It has been, so far, one of the most difficult things that I've had to figure out. But today I am going to just try my best. And if you have any requests, as always, please feel free to request whatever video you would like to hear. Okay? And I will do my best to do that video. I am in my supposedly soundproof room that is being redone, and I think there's a bit of an echo, but hopefully that won't affect the sound quality. Okay, so this first story is called The Limping Woman. You hear the uneven footsteps first. Drag, click, drag, click, drag, click. That's how you know she's behind you. The heel is broken off of her left shoe, and she drags it across the ground with every step, a sharp contrast to the steady click of her still intact pump. "Help me," she whispers. It's an urgent, anguished plea. "Please, I'm hurt. Help me." "Don't turn around. That's when she gets you. Don't run. She still gets you. But this time, she's going to make it hurt. At least that's the rumor anyway. Every small town has at least one, a local urban legend that everyone knows and swears is true, because their sister's best friend's cousin, neighbor's grandson knew a fella who actually encountered it. Ours was the Limping Woman, so named for her aforementioned distinct yet. It was said that she was a teacher at the elementary school some decades before, young, beautiful, and the victim of a terrible murder. She had been walking home to the house she shared with her parents one night after school when she realized she was being followed. She sped up, and so did her pursuer, until they were both running down this dark country lane with only open farmland on either side. Her heel broke and her ankle snapped, and she fell, and her pursuer became her murderer. It was a slow, torturous affair that left her beaten and covered in stab wounds. And when the killer was done, he just left her to bleed out. And beside the road, she wasn't found until the next morning. And by then, all anyone could do was search for the person responsible. While some believe the man was caught and dealt with not long after, others think he or she is still at large, and the limping woman, as the victim became to be known, won't rest until her killer is caught. I was always skeptical at best of the story. I'd passed the spot where she's supposed to appear 100 times without incident, as did everyone else I knew. If a murderous ghost lived there, I was pretty sure I'd have seen her. I said as much to my friend Steffi when she brought up that a friend of a friend of a friend had met the limping woman during lunch at school one day. It's true. She was out on the old highway a couple nights ago and saw her. Steffi insisted stubbornly over our sandwiches. If she actually saw her, wouldn't she be dead? I asked. I thought you weren't supposed to turn around. Heard her, whatever, you know what I mean, Rena. Sure, I said with a roll of my eyes. It always frustrates me, Steffi, that I didn't share her willingness to believe the unbelievable. So how did she get away? She said the words, duh. Oh, right, the woman's last words. Last words sorry, they spell things wrong on here sometimes. Last words we all somehow know without ever having caught the one person who would have heard them. We know them because the real killer was never caught. He told people who told other people, and we all just magically knew to use them to ward off being killed. I finished for her. Steffi frowned. She loved all things spooky and supernatural, and had spent a lot of time researching our local legends, especially the limping woman. It's not magic, it just reminds me of her own mother, and she gets distracted by her grief and leaves you alone. Oh, okay, I said, hoping that would be enough to put an end to the topic. It was an argument neither of us would win, and I didn't feel like getting into it again over whether or not a ghost was real. At 15, it was startling to feel silly. Steffi, however, wasn't going to let me off easily. They say she remains because they got the wrong guy, and she's angry about it. Like anyone knew it, but no one cared because they wanted to blame someone. Don't you feel at least a little bad for her? She's waiting for justice all this time. Steffi, she only goes after people who don't believe in her. You know. I didn't like the way Steffi said that, like she had an idea forming that I wouldn't approve of, and shook my head. Whatever it is, no. We could go out there, out to the spot she haunts. No, don't be dumb, I said. You don't believe anyways, so what's the big deal? I've walked past there a lot, okay? Nothing's ever happened. Have you gone after dark? Steffi had started to smile. No, but so what? That's when she's active. Going on in the day doesn't count. This is dumb, I said again. We'll go tonight. Every argument I had met with was with questions of whether I was afraid, and Steffi was mocking me. Sorry, my eye bothering me. It's dry. Every argument I had met was with questions of whether I was afraid to, and Steffi mocking me for being chicken. She kept it up for the rest of lunch. though our shared science class, and then passed me notes in the halls between classes after that. By the time the final bell rang, she had worn me down. But not because I believe she's there. I made sure she knew. I'm just going, so you shut up. The sun just after 5 that evening. At 7, we met up on our bikes in front of my neighborhood. Her parents thought she was doing a project at mine. Mine thought I was at hers, and we had 2 hours to ride out to the farm where the limping woman was said to haunt and get back before they started trading phone calls. We pedaled hard and fast, leaving behind the glow from windows and street lamps until darkness swallowed up the whole world around us. With only moonlight to guide us, we wove our way across town and passed into the outskirts, where the insects were louder, the stars brighter, and the safety that came from feeling like you were surrounded by other people fell away. It was hard not to feel entirely exposed out on that old flat road, where flat fields rolled off into the distance on either side. There was occasional barn or farmhouse set a ways down. Off of a long, dusty drive. But otherwise, it was really just us and our bikes. It was really just us and our bikes and the night. We skid up ahead, Steffi said from behind me. See the cross? That's the marker for her. We skid to a stop a few yards away from it and exchanged a glance almost lost in the shadows. Scared, she asked, breathless with excitement. No, I said. It was an honest enough answer. I was nervous, sure, but who wouldn't be when you're outside after dark? Remember, if you turn around, she gets you. If you try to run, she makes it worse. Just stand still when she's close by and say the words. Steffi spoke so seriously that I had to stifle a giggle. It was ridiculous. I kept trying to tell that to all the butterflies stirring in my stomach, but it didn't do much good. We climbed off our bikes and set them on their kickstand. Steffi groped about my hand and entwined her fingers with mine. She was shaking. Ready? Let's just get it over with, I replied. We walked up to where the cross was placed and paused. Steffi squeezed and my hand and took in a slow, shuddering breath. Her fear was starting to have an effect on me, quickening my heartbeat. But as I squared my shoulders and clenched my jaw and took a step forward, we crept along the roadside, careful to keep our eyes pointed straight ahead. Steffi kept reminding me in a trembling whisper that looking anywhere else could lead to trouble. A minute or two passed. It couldn't have been longer despite feeling like it, and nothing seemed to happen. My fear began to ebb, replaced by an admittedly relieved giddiness that I had been right, and I almost turned to Steffi to say, I told you so. And then I realized how quiet it was. All the insects that had been singing loudly when we arrived had gone silent. There were no distant calls from night birds, no breeze passing over us, nothing. Just the sound of our own breathing. To my surprise, Steffi sighed. Disappointed, I wondered if she realized how quiet everything had become and how she could not feel how claustrophobic it had become out on that open road, how closed off we were in the dark and in the silence. I wanted to ask her, but the question was like a knot in my throat that I couldn't untangle. Behind us, grass rustled, followed by the crunch of loose gravel underfoot. Like someone was pulling themselves slowly out of the field and onto the road. Drag, click, drag, click. Every hair on my body stood up at once. Rena, I hadn't realized the grip on Steffi's hand tightened so much I could feel her eyes on me, but couldn't bring myself to look at her. From somewhere over my shoulder, a woman started to sob softly. "Help me," she cried plaintively. "Rena," Stephanie said again. "She's coming," I managed to whisper. Instead of being scared, Steffi snorted, real funny. "I get it. Okay, the limping woman is just made up. I'm convinced now. You don't have to rub it in. Drag, click, drag, click." The unmistakable sound of someone inching towards us, slowly, painfully, crying out with each step. "Please," she begged. "I'm hurt and he's still out there." "Steffi," I hissed, tears burning in my eyes. "She's coming." There must have been something in my voice, a tightness that only true terror could cause. That convinced my friend that I wasn't pretending. I'm sorry, sometimes I lose my place because my eyes are not very, I have bad eyesight. She grabbed my forearm with her other hand and clutched it until her nails were digging into my skin. "She only goes after people who don't believe," Steffi said. That must be why." "What do?" I begged, my mind white and blank. My entire body was screaming to run, to get away from that thing, and was getting closer and closer, but Steffi's firm grasp and my own mounting dread held me in place. "Please," the limping woman sobbed. "Turn around. Help me." "The words," Steffi said hurriedly. "You have to say the words, then when she's right behind you." What words? I wanted to scream, but I couldn't speak or think. I could only hear her. Drag, click, drag, click. The legend said you'd hear her uneven footsteps and be forced to listen to her pleas, but no one ever mentioned the smell. The stench of rot and earth and blood oozed the air, slowly surrounding me and wrapping itself around me like tentacles, smothering me. I gagged and pressed my free hand over my mouth, shook my head violently, trying to clear it, trying to make sense of things. Steffi was jerking on my arm and saying something to me over and over again, but I could barely hear her. Over the limping woman's cries, the smell was getting so strong, making my stomach pitch and heave until I thought I'd be sick. I leaned heavily on Steffi, and she pulled me in close, so close that her lips were beside my ear. Through the veil of panic and nausea, I heard her scream, "Say the words!" Drag, click, drag, click. The limping woman was so close behind us now that I could feel the chill radiating off of her. The words, I thought. I had to say the words. It just reminds her of her own mother, and she gets distracted by her grief and leaves you alone. I heard Steffi's voice from the previous day echo in my head. Her mother, the words remind her of her mother, the limping woman's last words. Please. Bile rose in the back of my throat. My mother's waiting for me. The footsteps stopped and were replaced by a high-pitched, heart-wrenching keen. From somewhere off in the night, a dog started to howl. Insects began to sing. The wind whistled across the field. Sounds of normalcy of life. The limping woman continued to screech while I found my legs again, with Steffi in tow, tore back to the bikes. I never once looked up from the ground. The only thing I saw as we darted by was a pair of feet in torn stockings and pumps, and the heel of one of which was missing. We didn't stop riding until we made it back to the lawn, and when we got there, I raced to the bushes on the side of the house and vomited. Steffi claims she didn't hear or see anything that night, but she believes that I did. She believes that I encountered the limping woman. I tried to come up with some kind of rationalization for it, like the power of suggestion or something. But when I think back to those footsteps and the sobs and that final scream, I know there is only explanation, and I now too believe in the limping woman. Well, that is interesting. Let me see what else I can find. I'll pause really quick. What you guys think? Is it scary? I find it a bit scary. I don't like things coming up behind me and then not being able to turn around. That would be pretty bad. Okay, I found another one I think sounds pretty darn scary. And the reason why I say that is because, like I've mentioned you guys quite a few times, I live in the woods. I have neighbors in this area. I kind of live in a resort town, but it is a lot of woods up here. It depends on which direction when you leave my driveway, where you'll get a few houses here and there that are right next to each other. And then there's a lake across the street with lots of cabins, and people only come up on the weekends or, things like that. In the winter, they go snowmobiling, and in the summer, they enjoy being on a boat, jet ski, whatever, have family parties. But it does get awfully quiet around here some of the times, and I have this neighbor, and I'm not trying to badmouth him or assume anything wrong. However, I do kind of wonder, because I have encountered him, and before I had my baby, or even after I had my baby, anytime I ever went outside, now there's a fence between my yard and his, and anytime I've ever come in contact with him, I have gotten a really bad vibe. And it's a big house, a big log cabin. He's got about an acre or two. He's got a pond on his property, and I think he has a little bit of the forest around him. So, but he doesn't have anyone, and he has like one visitor, which is his brother. And I just get this creepy vibe from him, because when I would go for a walk, when I first moved up here, he would go for a walk. It was almost like I wonder if he's like spying on me. Luckily, he's a truck driver also, but he works for a company that makes him, he's regional, where he's gone during the week and then he comes back on the weekend. But I never see him go, and I rarely see him go, and I rarely see him come. And the only time I know he's there is because every time he's home, he does his lawn, he mows his lawn, and he will do some yard work or go for a ride on his motorcycle or something like that. But the thing that creeped me out the most, people around here had told me stories, and I really don't like assuming things about people, but when you meet them and your dog doesn't like them and you just get this bad vibe, you have to be cautious, especially now that I have a daughter. But I have a German Shepherd, and he followed me, or I don't think he followed me, obviously, but he seen me going on a walk one time, and he stopped me. He was outside of his house in his front yard doing some raking by a tree in the summer, and I was like, he said hi to me, and he said, "Oh, the baby," I didn't feel comfortable him looking at my baby, but I was friendly because I could be wrong. Although I have had some bad experiences with neighbors, I can also share that with you too. But first, let's finish this story, and then I will get to this story, okay? So, my German Shepherd, I had her with me on the way back, and he kept on looking down at my dog and then, up and trying to talk to me, but he looked terrified of my dog. She's a very friendly dog, and but she's still being trained. She's under 2 years old, so she's a puppy. But without my dog, I don't know what I would do, because when my husband is not here, and if I don't know, sometimes he might call in sick and be here the whole week, or, maybe my husband won't make it home on the weekends if he does a run, truck driving. And without my dog, I don't know what I would do, because she makes me feel safe. Just knowing that she's there. He's definitely afraid of her. But what really creeped me out the most after all of this and all my encounters with him, and this isn't even the worst thing that's ever happened to me regarding a neighbor. But anyways, okay, so I have a neighbor who was kind of buddies with them at first. He tries to make buddies with everybody up here. He's kind of a good old boy, as we call him in the country. He talks to everyone, gets to know all the business. He's not necessarily trying to be nosy, just trying to keep everyone informed and keep the neighborhood safe. Not neighborhood, but, keep the neighbors safe. And he has good intentions, and he helps us. So anyways, he was hanging out with him, and that was his buddy at the time. And he took him somewhere, and my neighbor was driving, and he said that he looked over and he caught my next door neighbor looking at him, like his eyes weren't fully shut, and he was kind of like staring at my other neighbor that was driving, the helpful neighbor, out of the corner of his eyes. And it was very creepy for him as a grown man even. Can you imagine being a woman? So he stopped really helping him and going around, because he just thought that was really too much. And I've often gotten really bad feelings, like he's watching me or things like that, but I don't know. It could be my bias, because my second story comes from when I was 19 years old. My boyfriend at the time, he was a manager for an apartment building, so we got free rent, and he had to do the maintenance and fixing things and take care of any disputes between people who lived there. And there was a man, and I believe I can say his name because he is now deceased. As some of you may know, I'm not going to tell you where I live, because I live very far from where I originally am from. I was born and raised in Kenosha and Racine in Milwaukee. Mostly Kenosha and Racine. But if you look up Kevin Dirks, he was arrested for child pornography and I believe animal porn, but mostly child pornography. But it included, and I'm not trying to badmouth them, it's just that I had to encounter this man a lot. And when I was 19, I looked like I was 16 or 15. I looked very young when I was 19. And when my boyfriend would be doing work on the apartments or going through and doing a run through, checking everything, checking the halls, making sure that things were a certain way, that was his job, to periodically check the parking lot and check the halls of each building. There were like 3. And so this Kevin Dirks was arrested originally for child porn, and then inside of his small 1-bedroom apartment, he had a lot of guns. He had, which I'm not against guns, by the way. We have a lot of deer up here, and it's a source of free food. Well, not free food, but cheap food that is healthy for you. So I'm sorry to anyone who is a vegan, but that's how we live up here. So he had a lot of guns, but unnecessarily, because he claimed in court, I believe, that he was ready for an ambush, and he was very paranoid that someone was going to come and they were going to invade his property, and he said he would shoot even if it was the cops. It was a weird conversation he had with my boyfriend at the time, but my boyfriend was like a 2nd-degree black belt, and I wasn't scared. He was training me in his friend's dojo. And, that don't mean I could fight him at that time. But if you look up Kevin Dirks, and he's a very pale, look him up under images. He looks like he's albino, but he's a white person. Typically, I think albinos are of African descent, but I'm not sure. I could be wrong. But he was white, and he looked very pale, almost like a Santa Claus. And the creepy thing about him is, the first thing my ex went down into the basement, and he found he was going through everything is supposed to be in everyone's designated area, the cages and storage areas. And he found a big bin that wasn't in a cage. So he had to put a note on it, but first he had to check it. It was his responsibility. And he checked it, and it was a big bin full of dildos. And he came back to me and he was like, what the heck? Who would have a big bin of that many dildos? What the heck? Is this a joke? Did somebody buy a bunch of dildos and play a joke on me or what? So then he put a note on it that they needed to claim it or it was going to get thrown away. Well, I think a week later, Kevin Dirks claimed the bin. And we were like, what the heck does he do with that? Because this was 2 years, 3 years, 4 years before he got caught being a pedophile. And then the second thing is my ex had to go in his apartment. And the guy was super secretive, super paranoid. But my ex had to go in to fix something because he was the maintenance man. And he said what he saw he should have reported, but he didn't notify him exactly when he messed up and didn't notify him exactly when he was supposed to go in. So he went in when he knew he wasn't there, and he ended up seeing a bunch of things like back in the day, Hannah Montana was popular, and he had pictures of her, and then he had pictures of pictures of young celebrities all over, and then he had child pornography on his wall. Not necessarily pornography, but old-fashioned pictures of statues, or even statues themselves of children hugging. And then he also had a thing for mothers and children, which scares me the most. He said, and that comes down to, in court, he said that he didn't feel much love from his mother, so he seen a woman kiss her child once, and he thought it was the most beautiful thing in the world. So that's what made him a pedophile and mothers and children. So then my ex said that he seen so much stuff there, like children lamps, naked, little girls' underwear. He said they looked like they were new, but put on the walls and used as decorations and things like that. And these were really young girls. It seemed as if he liked them really young. I'm sorry for anyone if this is a trigger for you. Believe me, it's not easy for me to talk about either. So that was the second thing. And then the third thing that really creeped me and my ex out was he was doing his building checks, and I would wait in one building for him. And my ex was a little bit, he gave me a knife, and then he had confidence in me that I would at least be able to scream for him, and that I would be able to fight him off long enough before my ex came. So, or I could just dial 911 on my phone and use my knife or whatever. But we didn't expect this, even though I had that on me. The concern was that he would come in and he would start talking to me sometimes, and he would look at me really weird and really funny, and my ex said there was something off about him, and I just don't understand why I didn't see it. I was like, am I being mean? You know, when you're younger, you're kind of naive and you're like, I feel like I'm being mean to him. But it really wasn't being mean to him. It was really the fact that he actually was doing something wrong. So, he would just, like stare at me and look at my private parts, like my breasts and everything like that. And then one day, like I said, I was trying to wait for my ex, and I was sitting, there were glass doors that led into the buildings, but you needed a key. And there were bushes by the glass doors, not the glass doors itself, but the windows next to the glass doors. And they were like the big windows as big as the doors. And I was just sitting there waiting, and I didn't feel anything or suspect anything. I didn't get any bad vibes. And my ex comes in, and before he did, he started talking to that guy, and I didn't catch where the guy was at. Just a little bit out of the corner of my eye. I'd seen him stepping out of it, but I didn't catch him completely. I caught him like coming out of the bushes, because there was bushes by that, like I said. And my ex, started talking to him and kind of gave him a dirty look and said, what are you doing, and stuff like that. And then he came in, and so did the guy, and he's like, I'm really sorry, I was just, blah, blah, blah. He just made up a bunch of excuses. And my ex told me, let's walk. And, we walked away from the man and out of his building. And when we got into another building, he told me that he had caught the man staring at me creepily, and he knew that it wasn't right, and he knew that it was some kind of perverted thing. He was staring at me for a while, because he said that he would have been there sooner. And actually, I was wondering what was taking my ex so long. He said he would have been in there sooner, and he was watching the whole time, even though he knew I could protect myself. He said I was watching him to see what he would do. And he said that he watched him for 15 minutes or more, just staring at me. And it was very creepy after that. And I was ready to defend myself after that. And me and him ended up breaking up that boyfriend. And a couple of years later, after I broke up with him, I was with him a total of 4 years, and we remained friends until I got married. But because we both moved on, and we didn't think it was right. So anyways, basically, it was in the newspaper. It was all over the Kenosha News, Racine, Journal, Milwaukee. It might have even been in Milwaukee. It was a big deal. They found that he had child porn, and then when he was being investigated, they found in his trunk duct tape, video footage of him on Lake Michigan, because we lived Kenosha is right by the lake, and that's what I grew up next to, was one of the Great Lakes. So he had footage of mothers nursing, like he would hide off in the distance. He had pictures of women with their children. Like, he had video footage of hours and hours of women and children, sometimes just the children by themselves, and then other times with their mothers. And it was very creepy. He had rope, duct tape. He had other things too, like weapons and gags and sex toys. I think. I know for sure duct tape and rope, and the camera footage. So you can look that up if you really want to. It was something that was very scary for me, and to this day I am very cautious, even more cautious as the mother of a daughter. Now, I will try my best after all that to read about this. I mean, just imagine how I feel after having that neighbor that got caught for pedophilia. He's dead now. He got killed in prison. But just imagine how I feel with a neighbor that I kind of feel shares some of the same characteristics, or a lot of them. So, the quiet neighbor. Just about the first thing anyone new to the neighborhood learned was to avoid Bud Fillmore. Cantankerous, territorial, and fueled by what seemed to be a deep-seated hate for just about everything. He was the kind of man that childhood nightmares were made of. Although he'd only lived there for a few months longer than us, by the time my family moved in across the street and from the Fillmore house, his reputation was already firmly established. When other neighbors came by with their cookies and casseroles to welcome us and saw me and my brother, just 9 and 11, they pulled my parents aside and offered hushed warnings. Keep them away from that nasty little old man across the way, Miss Devon said. He can't stand children. My son Bill swears Bud tried to run him down in his car, Mr. Crane said. He'll look for any excuse to yell at them. He says the most terrible things, Miss Paul said. My parents thanked them, but I don't think they quite believed them. My mom especially wasn't fond of gossip, and she tried to take such rumors with a grain of salt until she could make her own decisions. She didn't have to wait long. My older brother Scotty and I were outside tossing a baseball back and forth one Saturday morning when Scotty tossed it too hard and high. It sailed over my head, bounced in the street, and rolled to a stop at the very edge of Mr. Fillmore's yard. Both of us had overheard our neighbors' warnings and were hesitant to even look at the house, much less approach it. Go get it, Liz, Scotty said softly, nudging my shoulder. But you threw it, I replied. So, you missed it. I couldn't reach it. My whining had no effect. He pushed me towards the road, and after checking both ways, I began to creep across towards our ball. I had almost reached it. I just had to take a couple more steps and it would have been within my grasp. When the front door of the house flew open, "What the hell are you doing?" A stout man with thin gray hair came bursting outside and stomped across his lawn towards me. My ball, I tried to say, pointing to it. You brats throwing things in my yard? Think it would be funny to break a window? No, I glanced over my shoulder to see Scotty half poised to run inside and whimper. Get out of here, Mr. Fillmore snapped. Can I just... No. Before I could react, he scooped up the baseball, which had barely been touching his grass, and stormed back inside. The whole front of his house seemed to shake with the force of his slammed door. It was the first of what would be many run-ins with everyone's least favorite neighbor. Our parents tried to talk to him about his behavior, but he just told them to keep their nosy little shits off his lawn and away from his house if we didn't want trouble. Dad thought about calling the cops and on him, but as Mom became fond of saying, there was no law against being rude, so we were told to just try to be more careful. He must not have always been such a bull, Mom said over dinner about a month after we moved in. He's married, you know. Dad scoffed at the idea. Oh yeah? How do you know? Dolores Devon was by again for a chat, and it came up. Bud wears a ring, and she said she sees Miss Fillmore looking up windows from time to time, but the poor woman never comes outside. She thinks she heard Bud say it was cancer once. Poor lady, sick of and married to that guy, Dad said. Terrible, isn't it? But it doesn't explain a bit about him. He's just trying to keep things quiet and peaceful around his house. Yeah, sure, Scotty murmured, and Mom frowned at him. He's probably very sad and lashes out without meaning it. He's an asshole, Scotty said. Language, Dad warned. But yeah, he is. Whatever his reasoning, we all agreed it would be best to just try and avoid Bud Fillmore. Scotty and I were extra careful to keep all of our toys well within the confines of our own yard. When we played outside, I also couldn't but keep a wary eye on the house across the street, just in case he decided to be extra crazy and we had to run for it. That's when I started to notice Miss Fillmore. Almost every time Scotty and I were out and I happened to glance at their house, I would see a tall, slender figure outlined behind the sheer curtains in one of the upstairs windows. While I couldn't get a very good look at her, I figured couldn't be anyone but Mr. Fillmore didn't have anyone else. She never banged on the window or shouted at us like her husband. She'd just stand there watching us. I like to imagine that she was a nice lady, a quiet neighbor who just enjoyed seeing kids at play. I remembered my mom saying Miss Fillmore was sick, and I felt sorry that she was trapped in her house with her horrible husband. So I tried to be nice and smile and wave once. Just once, Mr. Fillmore appeared on the front step and yelled at me for being a pest until I retreated inside. When I peeked out the living room window later, Miss Fillmore wasn't in her usual spot anymore. Eventually we got used to Miss Fillmore glowering at us as she drove slowly past. His short temper and his loud voice, it was such a regular thing that our fear turned to caution, turned eye-rolling, dismissive. Bud doesn't own the street. You kids go out and be kids, and if he has a problem with it, I'll deal with him, Dad said. After that, we started to be a little less careful with our things and a little more free with our laughter. We lost a few balls to the Fillmore yard, 1 or 2 frisbees, but nothing we really cared too much about, nothing until Scotty's remote-controlled helicopter. It had been a birthday present, and we were both eager to try it out. As soon as we finished supper, we raced out to the front lawn where Scotty prepared for the helicopter's first flight. Under my brother's inexperienced and clumsy guidance, the helicopter lifted slowly from the ground and staggered drunkenly through the air. In his excitement to keep it aloft, Scotty didn't even realize it was heading right for Fillmore's yard until it was too late. Scotty, I tugged at his arm to try and turn it off, of course, but it only made things worse. The little helicopter took a nosedive straight into the hedges of Mr. Fillmore's bay window. Scotty frantically wiggled the controls, but the helicopter's blade was stuck in the thick greenery. As if he'd been waiting for us to slip up, the front door was flung open and he practically pounced on the toy. "What have I told you?" he bellowed. Before we could argue, he had already disappeared back into his house. Upstairs, the curtain fluttered just so, and I knew Miss Fillmore was watching. I wanted to call up to her and ask her to get the helicopter back, but Scotty grabbed my wrist and dragged me behind him to find Mom and Dad. When her parents went over later, he refused to come to the door. "Don't worry, kids," they assured us. "Next time we see him, we'll sit down and have a real discussion about this." That wasn't enough for Scotty, though. I followed him up to his room and sat on the end of his bed while he paced back and forth while ranting about how unfair it all was. He was fuming with furious, and all he wanted was his birthday present back now. "But how?" I asked. He paused, his gaze sliding to his window and the house beyond. "We're going to take it." It was a childish, stupid plan, with no thought to consequence or punishment. We were going to break into the Fillmore house and get all of our things back. We'll do it when he goes out next. I can figure out how to get the lock open. It can't be that hard. Then we just have to find our stuff. What about Miss Fillmore? She never leaves. You can distract her or something. I don't know. We'll figure it out. "I don't know, Scotty," I said uneasily. I didn't want to disrupt a poor sick lady for a few toys. "Don't worry, we'll just be in and out. She'll probably won't even notice we were there." I doubted that, but I had a hard time saying no to my big brother. Scotty put his plan into action the very next afternoon. We were playing a game of horse in the driveway when Miss Fillmore's garage opened and his car chugged to life. He was wearing his customary scowl as he drove by. The moment he turned the corner, Scotty chucked our basketball to the side and bolted across the street. I checked to see if Miss Fillmore was in her window, and when I saw no sign of her, I followed. Scotty's idea of getting the lock open turned out to be using a small rock to break the window pane on the door above the latch. It was something he'd seen in a movie or something. Immediately I had images of flashing red and blue lights and handcuffs, and my stomach turned sharply, but my brother whispered that it would be fine. He can't prove it was us. Everyone on the streets hates him. He sounded so confident that all I could do was nod. Scotty reached carefully through the broken glass, careful not to cut himself, and found the deadbolt. It clicked out of place, and he pushed the door open, letting us into Mr. Fillmore's house. I clung to the back of Scotty's shirt as we tiptoed across the kitchen. It was spotless, obviously so, and smelled of cleaning supplies. Every window had something tacked over it, old blankets and towels, blocking out the bright afternoon sun and casting the room into a gloomy darkness that made the room seem small and oppressive. I swallowed hard and forced myself to follow Scotty. Every room was the same, fastidiously clean, organized, and shrouded in shadows. The bay window that I knew he spied on us from had a little hole cut into the heavy velveteen material, just big enough for someone to see out of it. I could just picture him sitting on his plastic-covered couch watching us, waiting for us to get too close. It was enough to make me shudder. We cleared the hole downstairs pretty quickly, but there was no sign of our things. Shit, Scotty hissed. He must keep it upstairs. But Miss Fillmore, just stay close, okay? Stay quiet, okay? I nodded, too nervous to say anything else anyway. We'd only gotten up a few steps when the floorboards on the second floor creaked. Scotty immediately pressed himself against the wall and motioned for me to do the same. We listened to the soft padding of footsteps across one room to another. Scotty, I whispered, grabbing at his sleeve with both hands. Let's just go. No, you went too far this time. I'm going to get my helicopter. Door hinges squeaked from somewhere upstairs with the footsteps, and the footsteps stopped. Scotty pulled his arm from me and scampered up the remaining steps. Reluctantly, I went up too. We found a guest bedroom first. It was all muted colors and magazine quality furniture, void of any warmth or personality, like it was just set up for show, never intended for use. At least it was a bit brighter up there. The windows had only had a few layers of sheer curtains over them, enough to obscure visibility, but still let in light. The second room was obviously Mr. Fillmore's. It was the most lived-in looking room of them all, and even then, that was the only because there were some pictures hanging on the walls and some personal items on the nightstand. The bed was meticulously made, and all the clothing, most of which was masculine, hung neatly in the closet. There wasn't even any stray hairs in the brush on the vanity. I wondered how someone could live in such a cold, lifeless house. There was only one room left upstairs, one Miss Philemon must have gone into. Its door stood half open. Scotty and I traded a look. His determined mind slightly pleading with him to go. He took a step towards the door. I shook my head and grabbed at the back of his shirt again. He brushed me off and placed the flat of his hand on the door, pushing it open slowly. Inside the room was the most empty except for a large vanity against one wall. A framed wedding picture was on it, and I recognized Mr. Fillmore, despite being younger and thinner. In front of the vanity posed on a tall stool was a mannequin. She was wearing what I thought was a 50s housewife dress, white with little pink and green flowers all over it, a string of pearls, and a blonde wig carefully combed back into a bun. Her featureless face was fixed on the mirror in front of her. Scotty's brow wrinkled, showing the same confusion as I'd felt. We'd both heard Miss Fillmore walk into this room, but there was no one there. Let's just go, I begged. A cold sweat started to trickle down the back of my neck. Scotty shifted his weight, obviously torn, and the floorboard beneath his feet groaned. The mannequin's head turned sharply towards us. Scotty leapt back with a yelp and an arm thrown out protectively in front of me. Liz, his voice was trembling. Run! I stumbled back down the hall on legs that didn't want to work. I could hear Scotty stomping along behind me, and behind him a rapid skittering. We skid at the top of the stairs, and I grabbed the railing to keep from falling. Headlong down the steps, while I righted myself, I dared to glance back at the hallway. It was empty. Where'd it go? Something thudded against the ceiling. We both looked up and screamed. The mannequin was crawling, spider-like, over our heads. She wrenched her head completely around, turning her blank face towards us, and flitted towards the wall. She started to descend, the whole time facing us. I was still screaming when Scotty hooked his arm around my waist and hauled me down the steps. We crashed at the landing, tripping over one another, and we could hear the click of fiberglass on wood as she pursued us. I was crying, scrambling on my hands and knees across the floor, and my brother was shouting for me to get up, to go. He grabbed the back of my shirt and practically threw me down the hall. And then Scotty was shrieking. I spun. The mannequin was crouched on the last step, one arm outstretched. She had her fingers wrapped around Scotty's ankle. They were tightening, until his bones started to crunch beneath her grip. He kicked at her with his other leg, but it did nothing. She started to drag him back towards the stairs. Scotty! I screamed, but before I could move, he looked up at me and shook his head furiously. Liz, he could barely get the word through the fear and pain that masked his face. Run! I wanted to stay. I wanted to grab his hand and pull with all my might and drag him out of that house with me. But he shouted again, run, run, over and over until the words became a garbled mess of howling, terrified cries that chased me out of the same door we'd come in through. It was the last time I ever saw my big brother. No trace of Scotty was ever found. My parents searched, and police dogs searched. There were dogs and special agents and tons of time, money, and energy put into trying to find him, but none of it mattered. It was as if he had simply vanished. Bud Fillmore wasn't a suspect very long. With no evidence and no history of any kind of criminal record, he was let go. Scotty was dubbed a missing child, reduced to a single box of paperwork that was all too soon moved to the cold case stacks. No one believed me when I told them what really happened. They all said Scotty must have been kidnapped on her way back from Fillmore's house, and I was too young to really understand it, that I had gotten confused, and in my fear made up some story using the scary thing I had just encountered. Mr. Fillmore's mannequin belonged to his late wife, Sharon. He kept it after she passed because it reminded him of her. Sometimes he'd move it around, put it in a window, but it wasn't alive. You understand that, right, Liz? My therapist was fond of asking me. I told her what she wanted to hear, even if I knew it was a lie. The adults preferred that way. It was easier for all of us. Maybe that was why I never showed anyone the note that had been left taped to our door, typed and anonymous, that just said, I tried to keep you away. I didn't think it would have changed anything. I knew, though, and I never doubted myself or the fact that Scotty had sacrificed himself for me. And up until Mr. Fillmore packed up and moved a few years later, I would sit in my brother's room and I would stare out the window at his house. I would watch the second-story window, waiting for the telltale dark figure to appear behind the curtains, waiting for the quiet neighbor that everyone said didn't exist. And there we come to the second story in our scary Reddit stories. I do find that quite creepy because I don't like mannequins, I don't like dolls, I don't like weird old-fashioned toys or porcelain dolls. They just mannequins without a face. That's really creepy. So This is the first series of me reading scary stories from Reddit, or, like I said, if you have one that you'd like to share and write it out for me, then you can go ahead and send it to me. Instagram, email, or you can comment that you have neither and we'll figure something out. But other than that, I might tell a few of my other scary stories. My stories were more so disturbing and creepy, but I'm telling you, I have one of those neighbors. He comes across as nice, doesn't really have any friends, no family. I feel bad for him sometimes because I don't want to think the worst of anyone, but after the neighbor that had all the child pornography and all the weird stuff in his trunk, I have to be cynical, because you just never know. And when you get a bad vibe and your dog gets a bad vibe, that's not a good sign. So anyways, I hope you guys like my red new backlight, and I'm still using my computer camera and my Fifine microphone, which I love, but it is not omnidirectional, so it makes it hard for me to speak into sometimes. I'll be getting some new microphones soon, and there's a lot more to come with my channel. It's going to be very diverse, so I hope that you guys enjoyed these stories. If you were listening to them before you go to bed, sleep tight and know that you're safe and they're just stories. And you're crazy. Why would you listen to this stuff before you go to bed? Just saying. Okay. Alright. You guys sleep tight. And I look forward to making some more peaceful videos, even though I have more of these to come because you guys requested it. Stephen King coming soon.